It's 2025, and there's one question on everyone's mind. Are we witnessing, the collapse of the post-World War II settlements, a rejection of the 20th century, and a regressive slide towards the authoritarian and imperial politics of prior centuries? No, of course not. The question we're all burning for an answer to is the Dornishman's wife actually a song from Dorne? Hey there, everybody. Random Internet Guy here. Just a short video today. There's been a lot going on, and so it's been difficult for me to put time into making videos and stuff. But there's one thing that's been on my mind for quite a long time, and I wanted to sort of zero in and maybe make a segment on it by itself. Now, if you watch the channel, you know I'm not particularly a fan of the Mance Rayder is actually series of theories. Because they don't make any sense, and the evidence is bad, and it wouldn't make any sense within the storyline. It's full of a huge series of problems, and if you want to actually get into those, or if you want to know why this type of theorizing even came about in the first place, I have videos on all that. But one of the most interesting pieces that I thought was one of the most telling bits of false evidence, or evidence that could easily be shown to actually be contradictory, or not evidence at all, or basically evidence the theory isn't true, comes from the assertion that Mance Rayder clearly is from Dorne because he plays the song The Dornishman's Wife. Now, in case you don't quite remember, The Dornishman's Wife is the song that Mance Rayder is singing when Jon enters his tent, so it might be worth us going back and actually looking at that passage for a minute. When his eyes had adjusted to the smoky red gloom, he saw 6 people, none of whom paid him any mind. A dark young man and a pretty blonde woman were sharing a horn of mead. A pregnant woman stood over a brazier cooking a brace of hens, while a gray-haired man in a tattered cloak of black and red sat cross-legged on a pillow, playing a lute and singing. The Dornishman's wife was as fair as the sun, and her kisses were warmer than spring. But the Dornishman's blade was made of black steel, and its kiss was a terrible thing. Jon knew the song, though it was strange to hear it here, in the shaggy hide tent beyond the wall, 10,000 leagues from the red mountains and winds of Dorne. Rattleshirt took off his yellowed helm as he waited for the song to end. Beneath his bone and leather armor, he was a small man, and the face under the giant skull was ordinary. With a knobbly chin, thin mustache, and sallow pinched cheeks, his eyes were close set, one eyebrow creeping all the way across his forehead, dark hair thinning back from a sharp widow's peak. The Dornishman's wife would sing as she bathed in a voice that was sweet as a peach. But the Dornishman's blade had a song of its own and a bite sharp and cold as a leech. Beside the brazier, a short but immensely broad man sat on a stool, eating a hen off a skewer. Hot grease was running down his chin into his snow-white beard, but he smiled happily all the same. Thick gold bands graven with runes bound his massive arms, and he wore a heavy shirt of black ringmail that could only have come from a dead ranger. A few feet away, a taller, leaner man in a leather shirt sewn with bronze scales stood frowning over a map, a two-handed greatsword slung across his back in a leather sheath. He was straight as a spear, all long, wiry muscle, clean-shaved, bald, with a straight nose and deep-set gray eyes. He might even have been comely if he'd had ears, but he'd lost both along the way. Whether to frostbite or some enemy's knife, Jon could not tell. Their lack made the man's head seem narrow and pointed. Both the white-bearded men and the bald one were warriors. It was plain to Jon at a glance. These two were more dangerous than Rattleshirt by far. He wondered which was Mance Rayder. As he lay on the ground with the darkness around and the taste of the blood on his tongue, his brothers knelt by him and prayed him a prayer, and he smiled and laughed as he sung, "Brothers, oh brothers, my days here are done, the Dornishman's taken my life. But what does it matter, for all men must die, and I've tasted the Dornishman's wife." So, there you go, that's the excerpt. Apologies for my horrible singing voice. But I think we can zero in on what is possibly leading people towards this whole idea that maybe Mance Rayder has some connection to Dorne through this song. One of the opening lines from Jon describes it being weird to hear this song so far from Dorne. And this could easily lead a reader to jump conclusions. Now, it's actually not weird that John is thinking this. It is kind of bizarre to hear a song simply in a different setting than you'd normally hear it in. If we think past that little confusion for a second, we know that there's lots of men from Dorne who come to the Wall, and we know that there's lots of musicians that filter into the Wall. One of them is even there with Sam when he's in Braavos, and he's kind of an intricate part of that whole little story. But the thing about taking things so far out of context is that this exact same passage could lead us to think that maybe the Magnar of Thin is actually Arthur Dayne, because he has a greatsword. I mean, if he's not Arthur Dayne, why would he have a greatsword? And likewise, this same silly logic could be used as evidence to say that Rattleshirt is actually a lost Dornish prince, maybe Oberyn's son, or Oberyn's secret brother, because he has a widow's peak, and the Dornishman's wife is being played near him, therefore Dorne. It's the same kind of bad logic that can lead us to ask, if the song involves the word Dorne, why isn't the guy who's singing it Dornish? Wouldn't that make sense? And no, I'm just going to put that out there that just because a person sings a song from a certain place, it doesn't always imply they're from that place. Like, yes, we know that people from the marches often sing long marcher ballads, and sometimes they're made fun of for that. But that doesn't mean that people from the marches are the only ones who know marcher ballads. But we're getting a little sidetracked with this other kind of stuff that I think is definitely indicators that this is a poor theory and terrible logic and all that sort of nonsense, but it's not necessarily going to help us answer our core question. Is the Dornishman's wife actually a song from Dorne? And I think the answer to that is pretty obvious. The song is clearly not from Dorne. It's about cucking a Dornish person. This song is from somewhere that has antagony with Dorne. Somewhere that would find it reasonable to cuck the Dornish. I mean, when you think about it, why would a Dornish person even say the Dornishman's wife? If they're Dornish, they would just say they fucked somebody's wife. Like, there's no reason to do that. It's a weird thing, and it definitely leads away from any thought that this might be from Dorne. And with that evaporates all of the potential for this to be evidence of him being from Dorne. And it would be equally dorky to claim he's from, like, the Reach, or the Crownlands, or the Stormlands, or the Marches, but this would maybe support that more. Again, it really is only evidence that he's heard a song, which makes total sense. We know Mance's backstory. He was brought up at the Wall, and there's people from all over Westeros at the Wall. Many sing. But there's another problem with this, too, and that's geography. The Dornishman's wife herself might not be from Dorne. See, Dorne shares borders with considerable other portions of the kingdom. The Marches and Dorne, while it's a buffer zone to the Dornish, it's also a place of, like, cultural intermingling. And in spite of all the wars and conflicts, there's a large cultural overlap in the Marches. And Marcher lords and Marcher people have very ready access to Dorne. I mean, they're literally neighbors. They border each other. These peasants and lords and people would be interacting constantly. It's not bizarre to think that the Dornishman's wife might be from the Stormlands or the Reach or the Marches or somewhere just near enough to Dorne that she could have been married to someone there. If she's noble, this is actually kind of likely. I mean, typically you're making alliances that matter, and so if she's a minor noble from a house that's, say, on the borders of the Dornish Marches, marrying the son or something of a Marcher lord is actually totally in the cards. And this is what kind of happens in these border zones where maybe it's intended to separate Dorne from the Seven Kingdoms back before Dorne's in the Seven Kingdoms, but that's going to lead to a whole bunch of overlap, you know? And so just right away, I would push back on the idea that the Dornishman's wife is even Dornish. We don't get any proof of that. The only proof the song offers us is that the guy being cucked is Dornish, which tells us one thing. The person who wrote the song is not Dornish. So I know this is an incredibly small video, not a big dive. It's more of like a zoom in on a portion of a theory analysis, but I think it's a very telling example of just how wild people get with theorizing. Just the name Dorne being in a song does not mean a guy who sings that song is Dornish, particularly when we can look at the song and just easily verify it's not from Dorne. So when we're looking at our theories and we're trying to figure out what makes sense and what doesn't, where George might be going with this, it's important to be able to assess these things and kind of look at the really goofy ones and go, clearly it's not an indicator that Mance Rayder is a person from Dorne. But that said, I'm sure the comments will be flooded with people throwing up equally terrible bits of evidence to prove that Mance Rayder is actually not Mance Rayder. And honestly, if you want to try to convince me, sell me on it. Give me the big comments. Type it all out there. Throw it everything in. Every last piece of evidence you have. I might do a remake or a reboot of the Mance Rayder Isn't series because it was 3 parts. Maybe make it a whole video. Hope you enjoyed this little minor dive. I'm still trying to work on putting out bigger stuff, and I'm still trying to work on the series reading too, so there will be more content gradually coming out this year. So that said, thank you everybody for watching, and if you look up on screen right now, you're going to see the various people who sponsor me through Patreon, which helps me do things like buy cat food for my cat who needs special food now because of his urinary tract diet. He's got to eat the urinary tract food, so anything helps, always super great. And you can get your name up here, and you can get access to content early, and you can get a few things that I've actually not ever put out on YouTube. And if you're interested in the series readings, I do drop those there like a day or two in advance, so you can also get the early jump on those. I'm also gonna try to be doing more lives, so, hopefully you'll catch me and the crew, the INC guys, Taco, Mira Reads, people like that who are friends of the channel. Maybe if we're lucky, we can get the elusive Kevin Pendragon back here. So look for fun stuff like that, too, coming up this year. So please consider throwing me a bone on Patreon, dropping a super chat, yada, yada, yada. All that nonsense that creators ask you to do because that's how we get to make stuff. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you next time.